So hi, everyone. My name is Sadia Kamran. I'm the Manager of International Development at the Faculty of Communication and Design. I'm joined here, or virtually joined here, by Caron Phinney, who will be who's an assistant professor in fashion design and diversity, as well as the fashion design program director at the School of Fashion at the Faculty of Communication Design. Before I pass the floor on to Caron, I just wanted to give you a little overview on, the topic and theme of this conversation. And I don't want to say presentation because we want to keep it conversational, which is creating an equitable teaching environment and what that looks like from academic environments, what that looks like professionally, personally for individuals. But we're in a very pivotal time, both globally, but as well as in education to rethink and re-envision what academia looks like, um, post-COVID. And I don't want to make everything about the pandemic, so I'm going to really focus on, the theme of this conversation, which is creating an equitable teaching environment and how important it is um, as a conversation to reimagine what education is and what will look like with some of these intentional choices and conversations that we continue to have. So without further ado, I'm going to give Caron the opportunity to introduce herself, both professionally as well as her academic background and her industry experience. So Caron, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Thanks for having me join you in this conversation as well. So my name is Caron Phinney. As Nadia said, I'm the assistant professor in design and diversity at the School of Fashion, and I'm also the fashion design coordinator as well. I actually graduated from fashion a long time ago. I did my undergraduate degree in fashion design with a emphasis in production management. So after I graduated in fashion, I went on to work at one of Canada's oldest bridal manufacturers for about 15 years. So I spent my industry experience really learning the ins and outs of production and design and process and marketing. And I kind of bounced all over the company for 15 years and kind of ended up in mass customization and a lot of tech work. And when that happened, that's when I got the call to come back and teach at Ryerson, and I got the opportunity to start teaching. So I've been teaching at Ryerson now for about 12 years, as a contract lecturer for the first about 10 and the last two as an assistant professor. So while I was working at the company was called Paloma Blanca, I started really looking at various things like the body and how diverse the body, even the bridal body is, and kind of what we were doing in that industry and how we still kind of had a standardized sizing, which does not work with bridal. If anybody's worked with brides, they understand that everybody's different. And so I started kind of questioning those standards that we had and also looking at how technology can help us kind of smash those standards as well to figure out how that environment in itself can be more exclusive. Something so as simple as not having a size in a bridal salon that a bride who is outside of the standard can fit in. It's such a simple thing, but it's going to make the world of difference to that person who is trying on their dresses. And while I've been at Ryerson, I've kind of continued to focus on technology and looked at sizing as well, but now also looking at broadening that in terms of the student experience, really focusing on what our students need currently, whether it be during their 4 years of education and then afterwards as they graduate and in the industry as well. So that's a little bit about me. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and taking out the time, a late afternoon or evening, let's just say that. But I wanted to sort of tap into, your experience with technology, your industry experience for 15 years in bridal wear. And correct me if my terminology is wrong. You were in the bridal industry and, you mentioned, one size fits all sort of, there's these categories created in the industry. And whereas now, you've always been a part of that rhetoric of re-envisioning these these norms that have been created. So using what you sort of worked with that experience and bringing that into your teaching realm and your academic realm, what are some ways that you feel like as an academic you have made intentional choices to embed that within your curriculum or within your courses to create that equity where every student feels like there's a place and space for them?
I think that's really important. What you said is that every student realizes that there's a space for them. And that it's going into every classroom, knowing that every student has a story to tell, that they're an individual, and how they approach their studies, what they're going to take out of their studies as well is going to be unique. They have their own experiences. They were brought up differently. How they organize their time and what they think is important, it's all different. So we can't kind of give them this is the way that it's going to be, and if you don't follow into this, then that's it. You don't really have a place. And I think that that's kind of what has happened. Like I can remember being in school and not feeling like I was a part of anything really. I kind of floated. I went through the motions of going to school, going to classes, and I didn't figure it out. And I hadn't figured it out until I went on to do my master's, and then I started working in the industry to actually figure out what my place was and what the fashion industry was really meaning to me. And I think that we can make some serious changes for that 17-year-old student walking in the doors for the first hour, well, remotely, I guess, logging on right now, for them to figure out how they can make an impact and where they fit into school and then outside in the industry as well. That's really, really important, because if you can't find yourself in something, then you're not going to be engaged in the material at all.
Right. And I think I just want to pick up off on that note, engagement. I think, when you were able to find these touch points and integration, integrate these students to feel like they're part of something other than just, another course where they just have coursework. How do you feel like, how do you feel as an academic, as an instructor, as a faculty member, you have intentionally, embedded these touch points within courses, how do you, start the conversation, before, the first day of class, or, you just said logging in virtually. How do we create that safe space when you technically haven't met any of the students? Let's just, stick to this academic year.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we'll just to add on, we may actually not, we don't know how academia will evolve,
mm-hmm.
past this pandemic. So, maybe blended delivery will be the new norm. Mm-hmm. So how do you see as an academic to continue to create these safe spaces where students do feel that, connection and that space that they feel like they can, come into their own?
I think right off the bat this year, I had a group of students that I had never taught before. And so I had this one class of 22 students. And the first thing that they're seeing is me, right? So it's me in terms of presenting the material. But it's also, I think it's really important that first class that you kind of lay it out. You lay out your expectations of the course. You lay out what their expectations are in terms of you as an instructor too, and making sure that you're all going to kind of reach that. So you've already created the safe virtual space in terms of, this is what I expect from you, and this is what you should expect from me as the instructor too, and hold yourself accountable to that, and to be honestly authentic and genuine in terms of your approach. For me, it's also telling stories. I'm a big fan of at least letting them in a little bit that I'm a real true person here, and that I have gone through the same experiences that they've gone through. Telling stories about some of the brides that I have encountered, or telling stories about just a little snippet about myself too, that they themselves can kind of feel, okay, she's being authentic, she's being open as well, that kind of opens up the space for them too. the other thing too is that right off at the beginning is to ask them how they are feeling and how they are doing. And is this what they expected, even from that course outline of the course? And then also, in some ways, making those small adjustments as you go. It's a matter of checking in with those students all the time to see how they are feeling, what they are thinking, and to make small tweaks so that they are constantly engaged as well. Whether it is a poll, whether it is, what do you think about this, this kind of technique, whether it's discussion questions, it's constantly getting them to be engaged in material that is interested, that they are interested in as well.
Honestly, what are some of the points that you brought up about that human interaction and being able to, let students, see that you're also just you're a human being. Yes, you're an academic, yes, you're their faculty, and yes, you're their professor. But at the end of the day, you've also had similar experiences. They're probably not the same, because it varies from person to person, but you've also went through that journey, and to sort of have that human touch to this, and we say this virtual realm, but I mean, let's go beyond COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID. I think it's really important that, as an individual, it's, even if you're in front of a live classroom, it's important to sort of have that human interaction, because then, the receiver is also prone to actually open up and sort of tap into their own, lived experiences.
Absolutely.
So I think this is a good transition into sort of what you touched on at the beginning of your introduction. You were like really integrating these touch points into the student journey, the student experience. What does, years 1 to 4 and beyond look like? And when I say years 1 to 4 and beyond, it doesn't necessarily mean that, all students finish their degrees in 4 years. And then there's another realm, which is post-graduation, which, how do we create this community and this, system where we're not just like, come to fashion at FCAD or come to FCAD at Ryerson, but come to us. We're going to be a part of your journey from years 1 to 4 and beyond. And that beyond includes further education, more years to complete your undergraduate degree, pursuing a creative career or not. So what do you, as an individual, but also as a faculty member, feel like, some things that you as an individual have done intentionally to create and foster these safe spaces?
Yeah, so one thing that we started, that I started this past 2019, I started having some thoughts about creating a space specifically for our Black students, our Black identified students. I noticed that by around year 3, year 4, they were kind of getting disengaged, like what we were talking about. They weren't really engaging in the material as some of their fellow students. And I was starting to question why. So the only way to find out is to ask, right? So to have those meaningful, purposeful conversations, one-on-ones, mentoring, whichever it is, to sit down and talk to the students and hear it from them, because we can assume that this is what they need, right? And I think that's kind of something that we need to get past as well. We assume that right now this is exactly what that student needs, and then later this is what they need. But we need to start bringing them into the conversation as well, to really let them tell us what they are feeling, what they are thinking, and what they need, what the issues that they're having. So I started having those conversations and realized that there needed to be a group where, first of all, realizing that some of these students weren't getting, they weren't feeling safe within the school environment. They weren't feeling that they were represented. They weren't feeling that they were being heard or being seen. And for anybody to feel that they're fitting into something, they have to feel those things. There's a reason why they're being disengaged, because they are not getting those things. So we decided to create the Black Fashion Students Association, which is the BFSA, to really create a community, to create a space for current students, for alumni, and for faculty as well, to be able to come together and talk about the issues that they face. And surprise, surprise, 2020 did kind of unearth some racial tensions, but guess what? They were always there. They've always been there. And these are issues that students have always been dealing with. And it's just kind of, they've been dealing with them on their own. And I think that already right there has caused them to be disengaged as well, to kind of fall back in the margin. So this group now has about over 50 members, both current students and alumni and faculty. We meet bi-weekly, and the students are able to just be, right? Just, share frustration, share joys. Just last week we had a meeting and we were just able to share everything that went great with us for this week. The summer has been awful in terms of everything that's been negative, but this person got a new job and this person got a promotion and it was this person's birthday. And it was just a great, joyous space that they were able to be part of. So that's one thing. Also, following up with our alumni too, outside of the Black Fashion Students Association, just in general, that follow up is really important as well, so that we know that our curriculum and what we are doing in university in those 4 years are carrying them through to actually make some moves in the industry. We're never going to know that as well unless we continue to talk to our alums to see exactly what they're doing and exactly the struggles that they're facing, and where they're going. So it's following up with them and also bringing them back into the mold so that they can also then go and be those leaders for our current students as well. So they can kind of look up to them and say, okay, but I can actually see where I'm going to go in 4 years, right? When you're in school, you kind of think, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. But then finally, when you can see somebody who is out there and they're in the industry and they're in the job that you want, that kind of closes the circle for everybody too. So.
And I think, intentional, and also just, like you mentioned, being intentional with like some of your, initiatives and, not just, getting a group of students together just for the sake of it or throwing an event together just for the sake of it, but being intentional about what it is you want to get out of this conversation. And sometimes it's just a conversation about joyous things that happened that one week.
Yeah.
And celebrating the positivity and the successes. And sometimes it's not always going to be positive and filled with successes. Sometimes you're going to have those harder conversations, which all of us have to go through because it's just a human, that's the human cycle. But I think one of the things that you mentioned, and you brought up the importance of staying in touch and staying in touch with those alumni is so key. And you had mentioned, like, you have to be able to ask. Like, you can't just assume, oh, they're doing great. Our curriculum is producing the best graduates in the world because of our rankings or because of our experiential learning, or Ryerson's known and FCAD is known for experiential learning components and its global exposure. But it's not that. I think you have to be able to identify that human interaction and to be able to get in touch with those alumni and say, hey, what's worked? What's working? What can we do better? And what have we done that worked for you? And what do you think we can do better to support the next generation of creative leaders? And I think, and when you're able to identify those alumni who feel empowered and they feel sort of like rejuvenated, that, hey, we're being re-invited into the system. They want to hear our voices and our experiences. It sort of becomes a feedback loop cycle where it's like, yes, yes, you graduated from here. And yes, we want to celebrate your successes, but it's not always going to be the successes. Sometimes a lot of alumni have their challenges.
Exactly. I was going to bring up that point. We had a meeting over the summer with the BFSA, and we brought alumni from 1977 to the 80s back to talk to us. And there are alum, who graduated in the 70s. She is doing fantastic things. She was just like on it. She was just such an inspiration. Then we had an alum who graduated in 85, 86, and she is not in fashion at all. She did not have a good experience. And I think that was very important for us to hear as well, because we can't just focus on the successes. Not every single student is going to become the next, executive, designer, whatever it is. There's also everything in between. So we also have to think about who is in that in between, why. Maybe it's their choice as well, that's where they have, and that is their own personal success. I keep on saying that success looks different for everybody. So we can't consistently be saying that these are the people that's making our program great. The people who've decided to choose that route is successful in their own way as well. So we also need to hear from them as to what they did get out of the curriculum, what they did get out of their 4 years, to take them on to that path as well. So yeah, I think, bringing alumni back and hearing from them means that we're hearing from everybody.
No, for sure. And I think being able to, you mentioned like someone from the class of 77 is killing it in the fashion industry and, went on that trajectory, but not every, I think there's over 600 graduates from fashion. I mean, I know it's a big cohort. It's, that doesn't mean that every single individual is going to get into the fashion industry. And I think it's being able to identify that interdisciplinarity of what fashion is. What are you getting out of the curriculum? And I think being able to understand the importance of curriculum delivery that goes beyond just one topic, one theme, one siloed way of delivering. Like you as an academic with industry experience, as well as your academic experience, is so tied to tech and fashion, and how you collide and you find that intersection in the fashion industry. It worked out. Now you're an academic, but not everyone is in the fashion industry. They may go into the private sector. So I think to identify that and to say that everyone has their own trajectories, everyone has their own journeys. Not every journey is a walk in the park. Actually, most journeys are not.
No. Yeah.
And being able to identify that. So I think that's really key. And, you're creating a lot of, safe spaces for students. You identify and you really focus on that student experience and journey versus just delivering course content, because you want to have that human aspect and exposure for those students. What do you think, what are some skills that will contribute to the reimagination of education, the reimagination of equitable education, equitable spaces, or, you're a fashion faculty member, so we'll say equitable fashion curriculum?
Well, I think from what you were just saying, the thought that popped into my head is that in my mind, I'm not just creating or educating fashion designers. I'm educating students who might go on to fashion design, but really this is kind of that point in which they come to university to gain an experience, to learn maybe some skills, definitely, to become a designer, potentially. However, but we're kind of, preparing them for life in a sense. We're preparing them to be hopefully a well-adjusted, citizen after they come out of university. And again, that looks different for other people in terms of some are going to come out with a career and some are going to come out and say, I want to go further and do their master's degree. But I think that that's the whole point, that creating an equitable space looks like, what are each of these students really need out of this particular experience? Every single one of them is going to come out different. And we need to remember that as well when we are reimagining our curriculum. We need to understand that our students, especially in Toronto, they are so diverse. We need to make sure that they're represented every single step of the way, from year 1 to year 4. That could look like making sure that our guest speakers are diverse, making sure that we are intentionally choosing a Black speaker or an Indigenous speaker or an Asian speaker to come in so that they can feel that they are represented and see themselves in the industry as well. One of the things I can say is that I never saw myself in the industry to really go and pursue it really with full force. I never saw myself there. So once these students can start seeing themselves there in our examples, in our case studies, to make sure that we are now including within fashion, making sure that we are including different perspectives, different voices, that we're not ranking anyone as more important. We have this, again, even with another example is with our own research collection. that our research collection needed to be expanded to, again, showcase garments from not just the donors who were giving those garments, but we need to be seeking out other types of garments so that we can show the entire fashion history. Right now, the history of fashion is very, very narrow because it's a very Eurocentric Western kind of through a very that kind of lens. But really, the history of fashion is so broad. And if we don't start showing that, we're going to lose students as well. And students are going to question, why am I not there? Or what else is there to be offered? It's making sure that even the language too, that sometimes that we use as well as we move towards more of a non-binary kind of system and looking at clothing that doesn't just have to be for men and women. So sometimes our language needs to be different. That in itself is going to bring more people in. The examples in our classes are techniques that we use that we were, and it's not to say, I also want to make sure that I say this too, that some of the legacies that have been carried over from fashion, they are very important. And we do need to make sure that we are teaching those things as well, but we need to make sure that we're teaching them along with everything else.
All right. Well, Caron, thank you so much for taking out the time this evening. And I look forward to reconnecting and staying in touch.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you.